So fellas, Destiny 2 is back online, and we finally got to test everything that went live with this patch. Now, these sandbox changes, guys, are substantial. They are essentially Lightfall sandbox changes that Bungie moved up early. Now, we're going to be peppering you with a lot of information here, but everything will be timestamped. First up, reduce all additional primary weapon auto-aim, bullet bin penalties by 60% at 0 airborne effectiveness, mouse and keyboard and controller. Now, pre and post, we're actually testing Judgment Hand Cannon with Stompy to sit at 0 AE. Now, they also increase the precision angle, which is how far off a crit shot you can be and still have auto aim give you the headshot instead of a body shot. And this is by 50% at 100 airborne effectiveness. Now they changed the curve to be exponential so that you'll get more benefits at higher AE for mouse and keyboard and controller. And we actually tested this with Malfeasance at 100 airborne effectiveness. Now they removed all additional primary weapon magnetism, reticle friction penalties, and at 60 to 100 AE, you get magnetism bonus compared to like pre-AE, but this is for controller only. You can actually see us tracking player movement at 100 AE here. Now I think one of the best representations of where AE sits is this clip right here. This is actually Pure Chill. He posted this on Twitter yesterday, and these are like real scenarios you're gonna find yourself in with a variety of different weapons coming out of your jump. A common question that many people ask is, how many of these did it take to actually get the shot the first time? I think the reality is that previously you would hardly ever even get these shots to land at all while airborne. So the fact that we're even getting that now means that the AE changes here are noticeable. With that being said though, building into airborne effectiveness is still recommended, especially considering the benefits it gives you on the higher ends. Is it as good as like pre-AE? I know that Bungie says that it is, even on the low end of airborne effectiveness. To me, guys, it's getting close, but this is not a dead stat. It's very obvious that Bungie wants to still consider building into the stats, obviously the counter strand and the in-air gameplay that we're going to be doing in Lightfall. Now moving on to SMGs. Increase damage and aim assist fall off start at 0 range by 30% and reduce damage and aim assist fall off start at 100 range by 6%. Now we pulled out a variety of different weapons here, one being the Etude 12 at 34 range. Pre was hitting at 14.8 meters. Hero's Burden, which was at 79 range here, hits at 22 meters. Post update though, Etude at 34 range is now at 17 meters. This is actually a significant buff in range at the low end, whereas Hero's Burden at 79 range is at 22 meters. Now for our exotics, you got things like Huckleberry, pre at 20 meters. Now it's at 20.5. Osteostriga, which really is a weird weapon to even test, considering it shoots projectiles, but 26 meters pre and post. Wrist Runner was originally doing 20.5 meters. Now it's doing somewhere around 20.8 meters. Manicore at 20 meters pre, post at 20.5 meters. And Teraba was at 22 meters and post at 22.5. So you can say there that there's diminishing returns when you start dealing with weapons here that have like mid levels of range. You're talking only like a half a meter difference. So the submachine guns this really picks up are your lowest level range SMGs. And this really just brings everything in line with each other. It also means for our controller players that want more stability, you have more wiggle room to actually build into that versus just overcompensating there for range. Now moving on to Forensic Nightmare. From the patch notes, we inadvertently skipped Forensic Nightmare when we adjusted the zoom of other SMGs. So we're correcting that oversight. Increased Forensic Nightmare zoom from 13 to now 14. Now, this is kind of a double whammy of a buff. Forensic Nightmare at 50 range, pre was hitting at 17 meters, post it's hitting at 19 meters. So it's a combination of the zoom as well as the change here to SMGs. Now I actually got to play with Forensic Nightmare today. I do not have the craftable version of it yet. I know it's crazy. I need to get on it, but I gotta say guys, I pooped all over this SMG. I thought that it was gonna be terrible, but after using it myself, I'm quite impressed with it. We're gonna be reviewing this weapon very soon in its crafted form. Now pulse rifles. Reduce aim assist fall off start at 100 range by 10%. Reduce damage fall off start at 100 range by 5%. Also increase recoil by 20% on mouse and keyboard only. Now for Insidious here at 100 range, pre it was hitting at 43 meters. Post it's hitting at 42.9. So honestly, barely noticeable here. Hardly seems like even 5%, right? Now pre-Insidious at 60 stability, and this was tested on mouse and keyboard and controller. You can see that mouse and keyboard has less recoil, but post-Insidious still the same stability stat. Tested for both. Controller has less recoil. So this is a big deal. Now moving on to the BXR-55, they reduced the battler's zoom from 20 to now 18. This is a significant nerf in its zoom. Pre-BXR was hitting at 47 meters, and this is within 85 range roll. Post BXR is hitting at 41 meters. Now it's still a very far-reaching pulse rifle, but keep in mind that is a significant drop there in range. Now Dead Messenger reduced wave splash damage against players by 35%. Again, this is PvP only. Pre, it was actually doing 131 damage from a single wave. Post, it's doing 85 damage. That is a heavy heavy nerf and substantially less damage than all other wave frames. Now, you can still do things like get the one-hit kill with lightning surge combo. This actually kills guardians up to 10 resilience, but what you can't do is get the kill with dead messenger and an uncharged melee, unless you're combining it with things like necrotic grips. Also, for those that are wondering, monochromatic maestro does not proc in PvP. Now, that seems kind of random, but if you were hoping to make up the difference there in damage for certain combinations, considering that dead messenger can cycle through all the different element types, maestro doesn't proc inside of Crucible. Now, Dead Man's Tale. Oh boy, lots of changes here. Remove the damage penalty for 5 stacks of cranial spike. Reduce hipfire and airborne aim assist cone angles by 25% on mouse and keyboard. Reduce hipfire cone angle bonus scaling from 20% to 5%. Reduce hipfire precision aim cone angle from 3 degrees to now 0.8 degrees. And reduce hipfire auto aim fall off scalar from 1.5 to 1.1. The main takeaway from this, guys, is DMT is noticeably worse in its hipfire form. Pre 5 times of cranial spike, you're actually doing damage of 64 per crit. Post, though, that's actually 80 per crit. So again, you're not getting a nerf there at 5 times cranial spike. Now, that's good and all, but again, keep in mind, how often are you actually going to be at 5 stacks of cranial? Not often, guys, especially considering how unforgiving DMT feels when firing from the hip. Again, like it was previously, Bungie's really pushing this weapon back into its lane to be utilized as a scout rifle. But what about PvE? Now, guys, we actually went and tested this inside of PvE, and turns out that it did get a buff at cranial spike times 5, but it depends on whether or not you're shooting the weapon from the hip or aiming down sights. So we actually do a side-by-side comparison here. From the hip, it starts at 3% to 7%, 10%, 13%, and it's the same pretty much all the way down the board at cranial spike times 1 to times 4. Where it differs, though, is at times 5. From base crit damage while aiming down sights, this is only a 16% increase in damage at times 5, whereas from the hip, it's a 24% increase in damage. Now, I will say that does overall increase the DPS of the weapon, considering the rate of fire is 180 at times 5 and when hip firing. Keep in mind, though, what you normally run into is a situation where you're constantly having to reload. You're trying to hang on to those cranial spike times 5 for that maximum damage and that increase in rate of fire, and it's someone making me rethink the god roll here for DMT. Instead of Vorpal, which is very nice, like I hate giving up 20% extra damage, 4 times the charm allows us to lay on the trigger even longer, or even something like Subsistence, but especially 4 times the charm for single target damage. Granted, we do know at some point we are going to be able to craft our own versions of Dead Man's Tale as well as Hawkmoon, so maybe in a perfect world we could get both of those together. 4 times the charm, Vorpal, give us some of that Revision 0 action. Needless to say, though, guys, DMT in that sense did get a buff, but it is harder to land hipfire shots, and that's something affecting it inside of PvE and inside of PvP. Also, keep in mind that even though the damage buff sounds very nice, it's still less than what it used to do back inside of PvE. Instead of like a 3 to 3.5% damage increase per stack, it used to be like 7% damage per stack, and would actually cap out at 40% more damage. And that was when its default hipfire rate of fire was even faster than what it is now. Is the 24% extra damage really nice? Yes. I definitely like it more than 16%, but DMT is still not back to where I want it to be inside of PvE. Now, Citan's Ramparts increase the cooldown of the barricade ability while Citan's Ramparts are equipped by 70%. Also increase the amount of damage players deal to Citan's barricade by 25%. Now, we actually have gameplay here testing it against Revision 0. Pre-update, in its 4 burst mode, it took 4 bursts, which was 25 damage per bullet. And in its 2 burst mode, it took 6 bursts at 36 damage per bullet. Now, post-update, in its 4 burst mode, it still took 4 bursts, but you're doing 31 damage per bullet. So you're actually chewing off more damage per burst. And in its 2 burst mode, it only requires 5 bursts at 45 damage per bullet. It actually breaks on the first shot of the last burst. Now, the biggest change here is actually the regeneration time. So overall, guys, in my opinion, Citan's in PvP, oh, it's dead. Now, Touch of Thunder Storm Grenades. This was definitely one we were all wondering about, but the secondary strike damage was reduced from 40 to 30. They also added a 0.24 second delay between the grenade's initial strike on impact and the creation of the Roaming Storm. Also, the Roaming Storm travel speed now begins at 1.5 meters per second and then ramps up over 1.3 seconds to a maximum of 3 meters per second. This previously traveled at a flat 3.5 meters per second, and the Roaming Storm's target search range now increases over 2 seconds after creation rather than starting at full size. Now, what I can say about PvP is that it's really easy to avoid storm grenades, like really easy. Also, the tracking is nowhere near as aggressive, so you can like move out of the AoE effect and not have to just completely scoot off the side of the map. You just have to get outside of the ring and you're good. Now, in terms of PvE, this is definitely what we were really wondering about. PvE damage damage versus Coral pre-updates, the average lightning strike damage was 11,084. Now, base Touch of Thunder storm grenades does somewhere around 100 to 115,000 damage. And then with things like Spark of Shock, this is the same base with Touch of Thunder plus 5 jolt ticks, 6,269 times 5 at 31,345 jolt damage. And this actually gave us somewhere around 131 to 146,000 damage. Then combine Spark of Shock with Spark of Magnitude for that extra second and a half. This can crank our damage up to almost 160,000. Now, post Sandbox change, not only is the roaming storm damage here doing somewhere around 30 to 31 inside of PvP, but inside of PvE, that damage has diminished to 8,313. Now, base plus Touch of Thunder, we did multiple grenade tests, and it's looking somewhere around 70,000 to 90,000 damage now. Spark of Shock plus Touch of Thunder, though, is somewhere around 88,000 to 108,000. Now, interestingly enough, we're not exactly getting 5 jolt ticks. We're actually only getting about 3, which is why we're only getting that extra 18,000 jolt damage versus 31,000 that we were getting before. Now, Spark of Shock plus Spark of Magnitude for that extra second and a half plus Touch of Thunder, nothing really changes here. You get a possible +1 increase in jolts, giving us 4 stacks, but this is still down from 5 that it was previously doing, giving us a minimum of 88,807 damage to a max of somewhere around 123,000 damage. Overall, we're not getting as many full damage lightning strikes as we were before, and those full damage lightning strikes being that 11,084 damage pre-hotfix versus the 8,313 damage that it's doing now. And the lightning strikes really do different amounts of damage depending on how close they are to Coral. Now, this has always been the case, but the tracking seems much slower now, and it's noticeable inside of PvP, but it's also noticeable inside of PvE. Big takeaway here, guys, you're gonna have to be more accurate with your grenade throws inside of PvE, as the travel speed of the storm is just outright slower. That's why the overall average damage here is lower than just the 7.5% nerf to lightning strikes. Now, for just a point of reference, pulse grenades plus Spark of Shock plus Spark of Magnitude plus Touch of Thunder is around 140,000 damage, and this still goes up to 5 ticks of jolts, sometimes 6 with Spark of Magnitude. Now, I still like storm grenades because it does have some tracking capabilities, but for my PvE players that are playing in more tight corridors, or you're trying to do the most amount of damage to a single target, pulse grenade may actually be the play for you. Again, I still like storm grenades a lot for the immediate damage that it does and the small amount of tracking that it does, thus adding more forgiveness here. And Heart of Immortals line is still very, very good here, guys, with Touch of Thunder and our Arc 3.0 builds on Titan. So guys, that is our breakdown of everything. As far as like subjective tests goes, I need to play inside of PvP more. I need to play with the old meta, hand cannon shotguns, playing aggressively, going for kills in air, and that's going to require us playing trials this weekend and probably some comp just to kind of get a feel for things. I'll be giving my full thoughts on where airborne effectiveness sits now, but I definitely would love to hear your comments on the matter and how things are feeling for you. Well, fellas and ladies, thank you all for coming and watching, and as always,
Slap that like button like your mama told you right.